bringing this awareness and this awakening to dads, saying, brother, you're missing out on
real strength comes from being really honest with that.
How do we get good men to go deep?
Most men are living a very small version of life.
The greatest opportunities are right with our own children.
It's all for them, but it starts with me.
Men need rites of passage.
We need to be really honest with what's happening to our boys right now.
There's so much power when men come together to support each other to be better men. Gentlemen, welcome to the Formidable Family Man podcast. I'm your host, Greg Denning. Today, my guest is Dan Doty. Dan is a writer. He's a men's work leader. He's a wilderness guide, and he's a meditation teacher. Dan and his family live in Maine. He's got a wife and 3 young children. He's the co-founder of Everyman, which is an organization dedicated to emotional well-being for men, and he's a founder of Fatherhood Unlocked. Dan leads guided trips all over the world for men. He's been on the Joe Rogan Experience 3 times. He's had works published in New York Times, Men's Health, GQ, The Washington Post. He's just a great guy with a lot of insights to share. In this show, he and I talk about rites of passage. We talk about things that can be done to meet the needs of boys and men, especially, the social and emotional needs and how they flourish when that happens. We talk about how most men are living a small version of life and not really leaning into who they could be. We talk about how we have to get down to the deeper layers emotionally and unlock the things that are in there. And of course, he shares some amazing non-negotiables, habits and actions that we can take today, both in our inner lives and in our outer lives, to become better husbands and fathers. So, gentlemen, enjoy this episode. All right, Dan, man, super excited to have you here today, brother, and talk about some of the cool projects you're doing and hear some of the amazing stories you had. Why don't you give us an introduction, tell us about yourself and your family and the work you're doing.
My name is Dan Doty. I live on the coast of Maine. I'm a dad, I think is the first line on my biography.
Yes.
Probably says that. I have 3 kids. They're 8, 6, and 3, 2 boys and a girl. I've been married to my wife, Elise, for just over 10 years now. I got lucky. I got kind of unlocked in my early 20s and sort of set out on a path, professional path that has seen me do a handful of things. But the through line through all of it is I started out as a wilderness therapy guide and led groups of struggling teen boys in different wilderness contexts, right? So therapeutic context and correctional context is the type of programs I ran. I did that for 4 or 5 years. And in doing that, I just stumbled into my mission and purpose for life. It was very clear. It was all encompassing. And the moment that really nailed it for me was the first time I did some father-son programming in that context.
Yeah.
And I got to be there around the fire as a boy, say 15 years old, and his dad were kind of guided into an experience where all of the walls between them came tumbling down, with the force of a big bomb. Yeah. And really got to experience the absolute sort of power and possibility of, first of all, connection between father and son, but then beyond that, what's possible for boys and men and what's missing for boys. And that's what set me off on my course, right? I'll just do a quick run through, right? I was a wilderness therapy guide. I became a inner city high school teacher in the Bronx. I got my master's of education as a New York City teaching fellow, found my first men's group when I was in my late 20s. And that had an equal level of changing my life, right? I did that work with the boys in the woods. And then in my late 20s, found a men's group and realized that I had all of my internal stuff to work with, got really obsessive about the power of men and peers coming together. And then I had kind of a detour, and I was the director and producer of a TV show called Meat Eater with Steve Rinella. Went all over the world and made art out of wilderness hunting trips. And then I started having kids in my early 30s. I founded a company called Everyman, which is a men's work organization that has a global footprint, and left that in 2020. And I've been working specifically with mostly fathers since then. And I also make a fair amount of my bread just as an executive coach. So I work with CEOs and teams all over the world too.
Love it. Oh, man, what a great adventure, brother. Already all kinds of stories and all kinds of background. And I love this whole kind of panorama experience you've had with so many different people around the planet in so many different situations and demographics that, at least the way I see it, it lends so much perspective to men and boys specifically in raising families. So let's dive in right there, man. What do you feel like is really missing? Because you started working with these youth on these treks, and those things are pretty awesome. I've had a lot of friends do those, and be guides out there in those areas. So you start out there, and so that's been what, 20 years ish ago, and
exactly 20 years. This next month is when I really launched my career. Yeah, so it's been 2 decades full. Yeah, I've worked with probably, I don't even know how to count, man, thousands of boys and tens of thousands of men at this point, right? Just I put my time in for sure.
Love it. So what's missing? What do you see? You're going to see patterns. I mean, you and I, because I'm the same thing. I've been in this 2 decades, so we'd have to be blind, deaf, and dumb to not notice patterns that are just obvious, and they're causing a lot of problems.
Well, I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 I could pick out. The first one that I would speak to is I guess one way to say it would be the lack of initiation, right? That's one way to say this. But what I'm really referring to is that as a boy develops into a man, there are these huge opportunities for the adults, specifically the male adults in these boys' lives, to actually slow down enough and create the conditions to see their boy for who he actually is, his inner spirit, his essence, and to nurture that and cultivate that and challenge that boy to find and realize that he's much bigger than the small cognitive-based version of himself, right? And so there's this opportunity for, and that includes everything, right? And I mean, there's a whole huge part of what we need to develop as men, right? It's the heart, it's the emotions, it's the ability to be resilient, it's toughness, it's strength, it's this whole spectrum sense of self that's available. And so these opportunities to really be seen for how full and true and real that these young men are is just not happening. And part of the reasons it's not happening is because it didn't happen for the men, right?
So they didn't see it, they didn't experience it. So are they unaware, or they just don't know how to do it, or both?
Both, because most men are living a very small version of life compared to what's actually available, what's possible. And if that is your reality, how could you parent or guide the next generation into something that you're not even aware of yourself?
So if you're in this reality, and I like the way you frame that up, because then it's it's no fault of theirs. It's not, you're not culpable, you're not guilty. You said no. So how do they find out? How do they discover this? How do we get? So what I hear you saying is it's starting with the dads. It's bringing this awareness and this awakening to dads, saying, brother, you're missing out on so many incredible opportunities right here with your boys and daughters.
Yeah. I mean, what I found, so how do we get dads to wake up to that? I mean, I think that, the men's group and the men's retreats and the men's work that I've led and guided and been a part of is one avenue, right? It's not the only avenue, but it's one avenue where guys get together wherever they are in life. And I'll just use myself as an example, right? So I was 27, living in New York City, and was teaching and just got burnt out and I don't know, messed up, right? I was a wilderness dude, and I moved to inner city, and I was teaching in this wild school all day and going to class at night, and just it was intense, man. And I had a bit of a breakdown, and in the midst of that breakdown, I got invited to a men's group for the first time. Didn't know what it was, never heard of it, right? Wasn't looking for it, but I stepped into a room of 9 other men, all of them substantially older than me, all of them very successful in life, career-wise, but also very developed emotionally and spiritually, and just some dudes who really were intentional about life and had somehow along the way, found their way into a wider spectrum of self and life. I'll never forget it, man. That first meeting, those first couple meetings, I just I left with my jaw on the floor, partially just so impressed by the presence of these dudes, but also that they would see that in me, that they would be willing to bring me in, and it was profound, And I think that, in our culture today, there's a lot of sort of development that men are leaning into, right? Physical development, moral development, different things. But from my perspective, I think that there's like these layers deeper, much deeper than a lot of men go to. And it's interesting. I mean, the question is like, how do you make men more aware of what's possible? Right. So that's been a big part of my world and my work for a long time is finding ways to message to men that more responsible.
Same. And it's a lifelong question. And this journey is like, how do we get good men to go deep and to discover the underlying cause of the underlying cause and get in there and do the work. And I think, what you were saying, and I wholeheartedly believe, like the greatest opportunities are right with our own children. It's right within the walls of our own homes.
Well, and that's what I've found, man, is that dads are a particularly ripe subset of the population to talk to and to work with, because you become a dad and all of a sudden the stakes get way higher. Right? Our own shortcomings, our own limits on ourselves become the limits for our kids. And if we're paying attention, we watch that happen in real time, right?
Yep.
We literally watch it happen.
It happened to me.
Yeah. I mean, it happened to me. It still happens to me all the time,
Yep.
And it's not fun. It doesn't feel good, And so I think that naturally calls out in dads the need for the possibility for a real awakening and rite of passage for themselves, and there's this added bonus of like, a tagline we use at Fatherhood Unlocked is, it's all for them, but it starts with me. It's all for them. It starts with you.
Perfect.
And I think that kids also offer that accountability function of like, they are constantly feeding back to you who you are. Right. And so it's kind of a perfect setup for a man to go deeper and
it is
really discover who he is.
Yeah. And man, having kids is it's the most rewarding work there is. It's the most challenging work there is. It's the most humbling, because you're right. It's just a constant little mirror. They're holding up, right? Like it's either they're holding it right back up what you're doing, or even more importantly, who you are. And who you are is being reflected back to you. And man, we've got to be humble enough and aware enough to stop and be like, okay, I need to do some refining here.
I mean, yeah, man,
it
doesn't take long to realize that if you talk the talk without walking the walk, if you're parenting, if you're fathering from a place of just do what I say, it's like, man, but
not going to work.
You're in for it, man.
Exactly. Okay, so how can we? You mentioned rites of passage. Let's touch on that, because I know you are big on that. I wholeheartedly believe in that. You lead experiences. I'm guessing the experiences, we often think to get a boy to become a man, it's a rite of passage, but there's a lot of men who still, well, and I don't even want to make it sound like it's this lower level thing. Men need rites of passage.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So, it's a good time to talk about this. It's just really fresh, right? So, it was just 2 weekends ago that I teamed back up with Everyman, the organization I founded, to put together a first go at a formal event, a formal experience that we call Rite of Passage. And, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time and been doing in various ways, but this was like the first, like, okay, we're doing this specific thing. We're showing up exactly to do this. And it was a good fit to do it with Everyman because they have an established community of healthy men all over the place, right? There's, been going for 8 years, and there are men within that community that have done their own healing work. They've done their own refining, as you said. And that felt like the right backdrop, right? The right sort of, so here's the image from the weekend that I kind of dreamt up and then lived out. And it to me, it lands, right? So imagine a group of like 10 boys, age 11 through 15 or 16 in the center of a circle, right? Around them, their dads or uncles or mentors, whoever took the interest and the care and the time to go and do this experience with their dude. And then a third circle of men around the dads, which is just healthy male peers, right? Like a larger men's community that are there to support the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a quick overview of the experience because I think it grounds it in reality, right? So we had everybody come. It was just 2 days. It was Friday through Sunday, right? Had everybody come in. The first night, I led a bunch of connection exercises and sort of set the tone for the whole weekend. And then sunrise, day 2, we send the boys away for 24 hours to go through a series of challenges. And they slept out. They built their own shelter, fire, ice baths,
This is
emotional.
away from their dads.
Away
Just
from
the
the
boys
dads.
doing their own thing.
Just the boys with a couple facilitators, and put them through a series of challenges. And I gave them some framework, and some understanding. And then meanwhile, I have a couple other facilitators working the dads for a full day, deep dive, like full out doing their own, getting an inkling of initiation work themselves, and then also getting schooled on what their boys need developmentally, right? And how to set things up best. And then, so after 24 hours, everybody came back together. We had this beautiful ceremony, had a bagpipe playing. We watched the boys march from one side of the ranch to the other, and then had them pull up short and invited them one by one into the circle of men to state who they were and to be marked by their father and to be welcomed into a community of men. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's beautiful. So
And there was-
transformative.
it was amazing. And there was another retreat on the same property of men, and they were there to support the whole thing too. So it was epic. It was truly
That's incredible. Man, there's so much power when men come together to support each other to be better men.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the work for the dads?
Mhm.
Do you find it's a lot of kind of processing, like internal processing, emotional, mental, spiritual processing, like dealing with some of their own stuff and kind of having it's the inner work, right? That
Yeah.
reflects so much in the outer life.
It is. That's a good chunk of it. And like that organization, Every Man does that insanely, right? We've built up the capacity, and we do that inner work really, really well. But I've also in these last couple of years been very adamant about balancing out that inner work with action orientation and with action, right? Because that inner work you can't get around it. It needs to be done. But I've found that it also can kind of create a bit of an eddy in a man's life where you just kind of keep going in and keep going in and keep going in on that inner work, which can be really fruitful and oftentimes is necessary. But it's important to me to set that context of doing that with the action on the other side, with the intention with actually living, right? Because one of the things I've found in men's work over the years is that it's really powerful, right? It's really powerful and can have a slightly addictive flavor to it too, where you just kind of keep coming back for your catharsis. You keep coming back for that. So it's both, but yes, it does involve. So, like on that day, the focuses with the men were just setting the conditions for them just to cut the sorry, if I remember right, you try not to swear on this podcast.
You're good, but that phrase works.
Yeah. Well, you try to cut the BS and just set the conditions for just real honesty. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's actually a very fast, beautiful process to set it up so that guys can actually look each other in the eye and be real about where they are. And as soon as you start that process, it just unfolds into this really important and even predictable pattern of, so many men just assume that they're going through their own unique problems when the reality is that everybody is, and as soon as
that's real fascinating. They always feel so isolated and alone. They think I'm the only one suffering like this.
Yeah. As soon as you break that down, man, everything changes. Everything changes as soon as there's that. It really is just setting the conditions, making it appropriate and safe, and so men are just willing to be straight with you. Each other.
Powerful. So give me some specifics. What are some, because I know the listeners would want some specific actions. What are things that men can start doing today to be better fathers? What are some of the challenges or invitations you give to the men you work with? Say, hey, look, go home and do this and watch what happens.
Yeah. One really fruitful one and fun one, I think, is that regardless of how old your kids are, you can run some practice time. And the practice time looks like taking your phone and setting a timer for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, turning it on airplane mode. And then your job in that is to set your phone aside and get on the level of your kid, whatever that means. If they're a baby, get on the floor with them. If they're a toddler, squat down. If they're a teenager, get on the couch, whatever that is, and just show up with all of your attention, unbroken for that amount of time, right? Just get in their world and treat it like a meditation where it's like, you might get a thought of work or something else to do, but no, just like learn to be there. Practice just being there, right? That sort of unbroken presence, unbroken attention. That's one very clear thing to work on. There's another element though, where, kids, and I think especially adolescents and teens, are incredible bullshit detectors, right? They're very,
yes, they are.
Very
all kids are.
So if you're bringing your presence to your kids, one thing to be aware of is start a practice. So in the men's work, we have just something called a check-in, which is like the most basic, ubiquitous tool used in a lot of men's groups. And it's just literally practicing checking in with your internal state and then just bringing it out, being honest, so that there's actual coherence between what you're saying and what you're speaking and how you're showing up with what's inside. And so that means not masking. That means not trying to project more strength. That's just being actually honest, being transparent.
With yourself. Yeah.
With yourself, but doing it in front of your kids is just this massive, and that's one of the main things that gets practiced in these things, is just like, can I be aware enough of what's going on inside so that what I'm presenting to the world isn't a mixed message?
Yep. I love it. And we start cutting through the crap to get through the congruence. Well, what's often happening is the incongruence that's just operating inside of there all the time. We got the facade and the mask and the tough guy and whatever else, but internally it's off. And until we can address the incongruence, we're not going to make real progress. Man, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit here. I guess it's related, but I want to ask a direct question. How can we keep from being weak, and not just physically weak, but weak men, and maybe character and standards and values? Because weak men are real trouble, and weak men raise weak kids. So if it starts with us, how can we keep ourselves from being weak?
Well, I think the first thing there is to explore what we're talking about weakness and what we're talking about strength, right? Because I think we can easily paint ourselves into a corner of what strength looks like and feels like, right? And I do think that there's a inherited sense that strength is stoicism, discipline, not being affected by other things, not, basically, your old cowboy mentality. And that's part of it. That is part of strength, right? That is real. But where guys get into trouble, statistically, more than anything else, and they don't like to talk about it, is depression and anxiety and isolation and all of the behaviors that go with that, right? Mm-hmm. So addictions and just generally not being their best self, right? So my definition of strength includes emotional strength, which doesn't mean that you're in control of your emotions all the time, but you learn that develops, but it's actually learning that you do have them and that you are human and that there's more going on inside than you think is okay, right? Or that you believe that society thinks is okay. And so there's a term that comes from my meditation background called unconditional confidence. And unconditional confidence is not aggressive. It is literally building the capacity to be with anything and everything, building the capacity to be with sadness, the capacity to be with pride, the capacity to be with intense things happening in the outside world. So there's a version of strength that I think is anchored by courage, right? And the courage that I see needed a lot of the time is to drop the old traditional facade, to drop all of that, not leave it behind, not leave behind the discipline and all of that, but include it, right? And our kids need this from us. They need us to be able to slow down and be present with whatever's going on. They need us to be nurturing. They need us to be loving, right? And I think my hunch is that you get this, and this makes sense for a lot of dads out there. But what ends up happening is that a lot of men and dads will trade the fuller expression of their love for a role that they think they have to play. Right. So to me, real strength comes from doing the inner work and refining, along with holding on to the values of all of the traditional masculine stuff. Right. Like it's not one or the other. And I think that's where we need to go. It's a combination of physical strength, mental toughness, but not only, right? Because when we go down that route, we get into bad spots and we bring our family into bad spots. We're just replicating old patterns that are no longer quite up to date with what is needed from us.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a few images I'm want to see and articulate here to kind of illustrate this. But as I hear you explaining this, like, no, it's a very well developed set of tools or set of skills. So it's not just a couple of things. It's expanding to where we have the wisdom and we've cultivated the practice to know what to use when, and to have this deep authenticity. And I don't know how else to take it, but like, you're just fully developed. So you can feel all of the emotions. It's the whole piano. It's 88 keys, not just, there's 5 or 6 over here that men play.
That's exactly right.
It's the full thing.
Yeah. And language that I don't use a lot on purpose, and I really mean that. I don't like lean in heavily on this, but I think when we talk about strength and weakness, there is an inherited set of rules that a lot of men assume. And that means that if you're not strong, you're weak, right? But the true reality is that there is weakness in all of us. There are places where we are not able to fulfill our response. We all have those holes.
Yeah.
Real strength comes from being really honest with that and working with that and not paving it over, not shoving it away, not pretending, right? That's the thing. The real strength, there's a fragile strength which says, I don't have these feelings. I don't have these weaknesses. I don't have this stuff. So I'm going to shove it away and I'm just going to be strong, right? But a bigger, more stable strength is turning right toward those things consistently and working with the whole system.
And doing what? Let's say, so a man finds some holes. He finds some holes and he's doing the inner work and the outer work. And he's like, okay, here's where I'm coming up short. What does he do about it?
I mean, honestly, the first and probably most important and powerful thing is just to find a place where you can express that and be seen by other men, by other people in that space. And what happens in that moment, or you build the capacity to be honest with others, then it's almost just like, I don't know, water or energy just like rushes in. It just like fills up those holes, right? And one of my mentors would always say the antidote to shame is honor, right? So if you can stand in front of some dudes or whatever, therapist or coach or whatever it is, whatever context you set up, and you can look people in the eye as you be honest about your whole truth, right? What happens is just I don't know, it's hard to explain it, but you go from fragile and alone and isolated to just knowing that you're human, to just knowing that you're human. And then from that place, then you can start leaning in, right? Then you can start building capacity. Then you can set goals. Then you can be accountable. Then you can work on shit. Right. But,
it's courage and confidence. It's building on that base to go out and actually make palpable progress.
Exactly.
In the right direction. Yeah. Love it. Okay. So raising boys, I know that's one of the things that you just absolutely love. Let's talk about that for a little bit. What are the things that you feel like right now, this year are the most important elements that dads can focus on to raise sons?
Yeah. And let me preface it by saying that it tends to be the same stuff that men need to, right? So I'll give you my little overview here. And it's designed for boys, but it's also designed for boys in a culture where a lot of men haven't had this development, right? So here's the story. The first chapter of this spectrum is that we need to be really honest with what's happening to our boys right now. the statistics about suicide and depression and doing poorly in school and not getting jobs and not dating, like there is something happening.
Absolutely.
Richard Reeves has talked about it in really poignantly in the last couple of years. And so we need to get clear on that, right? I think that those are the stakes that we're talking about when we're talking about raising boys. The next major point that I run people through, parents through, that there kind of is, for most people, there's no external service or institution or voice that is prescribing what a healthy man looks like anymore, right? There's a lot of confusion out there. And I'm sure there's some people that hear that and they're like, hold on, that's not true. I don't know. But if you zoom out far enough, there's a lot of confusion about masculinity and the role.
Agreed.
Right? So I guide parents to do that work of defining healthy masculinity for their family, being like, this is a North Star. In our family, this is what it means to be a healthy man. And for my family and what I teach, it's this full spectrum, right? We're going to be tough as nails and soft as goo when we need to, right? We're going to have this full spectrum in us. So with a North Star, then the major areas that I work with first is emotional and social development, right? Our boys are isolating and technology is making it way worse. So boys need to learn about their internal world. They need to learn about their emotions. They need to learn not to repress things. They need to have a place to go to be seen the same way that men need to be seen in a full spectrum. And we also, as parents, need to really, really be aware and cultivate friendships, mentorships, connections, and really be on top of that. Isolation is killing, right? Isolation kills boys in many ways.
Yep. And
so
men.
that's that first block, emotional and social capacity and connection, right? We got to make sure that's...
Can I jump in right there? Because I know you teach this, and I saw it, I wrote it down for our notes here, that boys and men come alive when they have their social and emotional needs met.
Absolutely.
And it's so powerful how but that can be, for some people who's listening, that might still be a little confusing, a little vague. Could you maybe articulate a few things, kind of like, because I guess what's happening is there's a lot of good people who are like, look, I want my boys to thrive. I want, and I'm willing to meet their social, emotional needs. What are they? Right? And there's just a lot of they just don't know.
Yeah. Well, so the first, which I kind of keep harping on here because it is that important, is we need to make sure our boys have somewhere to go with the things that they're unsure about, right? So as they're going through puberty and sexuality is coming online, if they don't have someone who's really honest and straight and hears them and affirms them and sees them for what it is and makes it safe enough for them to actually have conversations and to be understood there, then we're setting them up for a lot of repair work in the future.
Yeah, we're driving them into isolation and trouble. Yeah.
I mean, they need to be able to have a place. An example is one of the places my oldest is 8, and he's not going through puberty yet, but there was things happening in life where he was starting to recognize things about sex and sexuality. He had questions, and so we were sitting in a sauna one day, and I had a first sex talk with him at age 7, late 7, early 8. But just in a way that made it very clear that as this stuff develops in his life, that I'm the place to go. I'm a safe place. I'm not going to shame him. I'm not going to do anything, but it's just like he has that. And so just even that, he's a young boy, but the level of sort of decompression and relaxation that washed over him, because that's too much for a little one to hold on. They don't know what to do with that. It's just too much. And as adolescence comes on, it's even more. Right. So it really just is that, and our kids are going to have all kinds of questions. My kids one of them is wrestling with death in a big way right now. When adolescence comes, sex is going to come on board, all of this stuff, and even small things, relationships at school and friendships, all that stuff. They just need to have good adult awareness that helps them make sense of life.
Yeah.
So that's one.
And this is huge, massive. Yeah. And I guess the way I like to frame it up is that most of us, it's probably subconscious or unconscious. It's rarely intentional that we make our kids afraid to come tell us the truth.
Yeah.
We unconsciously push them away because then later on you're like, I wish my kids would talk to me. And we're like, well, the way you responded made it so they never want to talk to you, right? You blew up over small things, or you were so afraid that they were going to ask you something and you didn't know how to answer it, or you didn't want to hear about it. And so they just, consciously or subconsciously said, well, boy, next time I have a question or I make a mistake, definitely not going to that guy. And we push them away. And what you're saying is so critical. We have to open those pathways back up so that our kids feel comfortable coming to us. And that anytime uncertainty, fear, doubt, disappointment, whatever comes up, they think, man, I want to go talk to my dad.
Here's a way to check it. Here's a way to sort of frame it. All along development, a boy is going to constantly be up against the place of, is this part of me okay? Right? And that part could be anything, right? I was working with a client a few weeks ago and we were going back through his history, and there was a conversation that two peers had with him, and just like were asking him about his appearance in a certain way, and that dude at the time, it just like he internalized this huge like fear. Holy shit, I'm not okay. This isn't okay. What am I going to do? Right.
And it brings it as an identity.
And exactly.
Yeah.
And had no one to go to, had no one to talk to, had nowhere to check that out. So, you live 30 more years with that as a major part of your identity. That's like running the show a lot of the time. Right. So that's critical. The other things socially that really, I think, so friendships are a big part, right? Boys are very social and are socialized away from friendships. There's good data and studies that show that. So we just our kids just need connections, right? We're humans. We're pack animals, right? We need to be part of something. But I also highly, highly stress for parents that, mom and dad is not enough, right? Boys, as they develop, need other adults that they look up to and they respect, but are also respected by, where they get to exercise parts of them. I think about my Taekwondo instructor when I was a kid, right? Like he was my guy, and he pushed me in so many ways. He helped me. Gosh, I went from a little soft mama's boy at the age of 6 and 7 to a badass, second degree black belt. It's funny. It's probably Cobra Kai, style stuff like this.
But it's as far as transitioning and transformation for a boy, incomparable. It's amazing. Martial arts, I think, are spot on for this.
Yeah. So as parents, we need to be assured that our kids have a string of mentors and adults that are help bringing them forward, bringing the best out of them. Right. And that's something it's like, okay, well, how do we do that? And it's you just do it, right? You just make sure that your boys are able to explore different things, maybe education, maybe sports, maybe martial arts, maybe art, whatever it is. But be aware and do what you can to cultivate meaningful mentoring relationships. It's huge.
Yes. You'll appreciate this, brother. So early on, Rachel and I, we recognize this, our kids need to be around other great human beings. Yeah. And fortunately, I feel so fortunate. I don't know why we weren't smart enough to figure it out, but we just had the sense that exposure was so powerful. We just got to get our kids out. And so that's one of the reasons we started traveling the world. We just took our little kids and we're going to go see all the coolest places and meet the coolest people. Well, but not just that. We're going to rub shoulders with the richest people on the planet and the poorest people on the planet. And every language and that we can come across and every religion, we're going to go see this stuff. And then we committed early on, and this is kind of answering the question that you brought up, the parents ask is well, how do we do this? How do I make sure my kids are around good peers and good mentors or role models? And we just committed, we'll move heaven and earth. We'll do whatever we have to do to make sure that our kids are having regular connections with inspiring people who've overcome horrendous things, who are doing great things. And whether it's, bringing in tutors or putting them in classes, or we literally have traveled all over the planet, going on expeditions and bringing, we'll lead trips and bring great youth and great men and women. So our kids we're climbing these mountains together. We're in the jungles, on the beaches. We're having these experiences with other good men and women. And that interaction, like you described so well, is happening in that environment. it's been worth every effort and every penny we've had to put into it to make it happen. And I'll be honest, like, we had to make it happen. We hoped it would happen. We're like, well, let's go here. Maybe it'll work. Like, the only time it's ever really worked is when we put in the effort to make it a reality.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that bridges well. So that first main bucket is social emotional conditions, right? The second is what we call intentional challenge, right? And that's all along the way, right? I think, an initiation or a rite of passage is sort of a formal set of challenge, and that's important in the process. But all along the way, right? Like, this is sort of the more traditional masculinity element in a sense here, is like, our kids, we can push them. We can set the conditions. Like, one example is, each year before school starts, I take the kids and we hike a mountain. And there's a lot of mountains in Maine, and each year, like, we go a bigger mountain and a bigger mountain, and like, I don't know, and just giving them more responsibility as part of it, setting them in conditions to where they can learn to trust themselves in unknown situations, right?
Absolutely.
That's fun. That's super fun.
So
right?
fun.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways to go about that.
It's not coming from you personally. I found this to be very effective, especially like wilderness. Wilderness just is. And the mountain just is. And the weather just is. And sometimes it's brutal. And so it's not me pushing them. It's me with them together pushing through a difficult challenge.
Well said.
And you get so far out and you're like, hey, if we ever want to go back home to your toys and your comfortable bed and those big meals, we got a long haul. Like, let's get gritty and let's do this together. And I found is, if I go with my children into challenge, they've become just unstoppable. And now seeing them as teenagers and young adults, like, I'm 12 years ahead of you with your kiddos, and like, you see it play out now. It's just like, yes, this is so awesome to see, these young adult men just gritty and tough, right? When taking on challenges, but then also tender and sensitive to people's struggles and emotions. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think one note on that too, the challenge is that it's different for every kid, right? And I think taking the time to meet your kids where they are, and, just being able to map out that next step, that next level. And, I learned so much about this on the wilderness programs with adolescents, right? Like, you get a group of 10 dudes and all different types of dudes, right? Your 12-year-old little video game addict and your 17-year-old thug, right? In the same group. And you have to learn how to make it work for all of them and help them each develop. And, in that case, I mean, you can imagine if we're hiking a 10-mile day, then the 17-year-old is not struggling with the hike so much, but the 12-year-old is. And that creates all kinds of dynamics, but it creates a different set of challenges for everybody involved, right? And so I think it's easy to prescribe for our kids what toughness means, what strength means, but if we're not taking the time to really see them where they are, we can make some missteps.
Right. And seeing that bigger picture of the well-rounded, fully developed toughness. Oh, I love that, brother. What are some specific habits, maybe some non-negotiable habits that keep you at your best as a husband and father, and some habits that they're in your family dynamics that you found like, hey, this just works?
I have a therapist that I've been working with for about a year right now that has just helped immensely. I have a men's group that I just restarted. We're actually just starting again, but both of those for me fall under the category of not hiding out, right? Yeah. Or not, just making sure that I have a place where I'm getting all the way down to the bottom of my truth and what's going on, and not just like throwing away thoughts and habits and things like that, right? I just feel like that's such a non-negotiable. I've had a meditation practice for many years, 14, 15 years now. That's a big part. And then just, physical sort of challenge too. Like this year, I'm co-leading a trip to Kilimanjaro, and it's just it's just an absolutely amazing force function to have a big expedition coming up that I need to be ready for. Every year I run a couple hunts. I run a couple first-time hunts because of my background, and so I do men's growth-oriented trips in the context of learning to hunt, which is really wonderful and powerful. And So yeah,
Oh
I just try
man,
to
I
keep.
would love to bring my kids and join you on a hunt. That would be
You
awesome.
should. You
Oh,
should,
I
man.
love it.
You should. Yeah.
So one year ago this month, I hiked. I also led a trip up Kilimanjaro with my kids, my 4 teenagers, and we led a group. And then I'm going back in a year from now, again,
Nice.
leading another group up, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. That country, those people, that mountain. The mountain is special, and
I
it's
can't
it's
wait. It'll be my
transformative.
first time.
Good. Like the first 6 days, it's amazing. 7th day, you earn it. You earn it. Oh, it's tough. But everyone needs to have experiences like that or some form of that kind of experience where it tests you.
Yeah. I came
And it's a good
across an
thing.
old timer once who said very clearly, he's like, your boys need adventure, and if you don't provide it for them, they're going to make their own. And I promise you, the adventure they make is not probably
What you
what
want.
what you're imagining.
Yeah, exactly. That is awesome advice, brother. Gosh, I love it. Okay, I guess one last question is what talking about maybe family legacy. Because so this framework I came up with, I've been studying this for like 25 years, just geeking out about it. I was out on my own at a broken family. Stepdads came and went, and I was out on my own at 16. And desperate years, just hard, brutal years. And I was just so hungry for truth. I did not want to stay in that kind of loneliness and suffering. And so I studied it voraciously for years, and I kind of came up with a framework. I'm like, I got to figure out a way that, like, what is it that just works? And I came up with a framework I call the triple trifecta. And it's fitness in mind, body, and spirit, family, it's marriage, fatherhood, and legacy. That's what I want to ask you about. And then finances, income, spending, and investments. So it's that legacy piece where it's kind of what it does is it draws your mind out much farther than today or the next few years. And because we want to have a great marriage, but for good. Like we want to, raise great kids, but it's not today. It's not this month. It's not this year. Like this is legacy stuff. It's the whole time your kids are under the roof. And then it's legacy for your grandkids.
Yeah.
So in that kind of framework of legacy stuff, what is it that you want your children most to remember about their time under your roof, right? What is it that you would say if they could look back and it's like, what's my dad's legacy? I know it's a big question I'm springing on you, but
No,
if you've given that some thought, what would you want that to be?
I mean, in terms of memories, I just, my kids know they're well loved, they're well seen, right? I would do our best to see them for who they actually are, right?
Right.
But what I would hope for them is just something that's stuck out to me for a lot of years, that sometimes I come across family where each of the members of the family is distinct and fully living their own truth, but there's just I use my wife's grandfather as an example on her dad's side. And he was this dude they lived on an island, and everybody that ever talks about him just knows they remember his laugh and his eyes and his kindness and and it wasn't just him, but it's clear that he brought this just generative love to his family. And it just infused and it's just an incredible family. It's a big family, and everybody is so expressed and successful in different ways. And I don't know, just I hope the legacy that I would bring is that my family gets to live more and repair less, during their lifetime. And then that just continues to propagate through the generations.
Whoa.
It's just like this.
Oh, yes.
Just this
Well said, brother.
just this living,
Yeah. Live more, repair less, because think of the leverage we give them.
Exactly.
The acceleration if they have to do less repairing because we did the inner work and we brought our best selves. And they get to just rocket launch from there.
Yeah, ideally, right? Ideal world, yeah. That's
Yeah. Well, and it's possible. You're doing it. I'm doing it. You and I both help men do it. I think that's a message we want to shout from the rooftops. It's totally possible.
100%.
We can make big changes and bring about beautiful things in our families. I love that. Okay, brother, thank you. Thank you so much for everything. Any last thoughts or anything you want to share with the men listening?
No, just thank you. This has been a great conversation, man. I'm excited to learn more about what you got
Beautiful.
going on.
How can people get in touch with you, brother?
DanDoty.com is my personal website. FatherhoodUnlocked.com is the fatherhood work. And we're on Instagram at FatherhoodUnlocked.
Love it.
Fantastic. Dan, thanks so much, man. Great insights. Great conversation. I appreciate you.